If I told you that oil prices will rise almost 100% in just a span of days, would you believe it? How about if I told you that the stock market might crash worse than the market crash during the pandemic lockdowns? Would you believe it? Or how about if I told you that we might be facing another recession? Would you believe it? Well, you might think this is impossible. You might think that the pandemic already brought the worst plunge in the stock market in recent years. Now, how about you bring the Ukraine war crisis into the picture? Do you think the stock market will remain unaffected? With Russia involved, do you think the US will not be affected by this crisis? Or that the rest of the world will be free from its economic effects? Now let's get right into the video. Make sure to watch this video to the end if you want to know how the Ukraine war crisis affects the stock market worldwide and what the worst-case scenario might be. When Russia decided to invade Ukraine on February 24, 2022, Russia's aggression shocked not just Europe but the whole world. No one expected that a war would happen in Europe in the 21st century. While the news certainly devastated the world, another thing to consider is that such a crisis can also bring negative impacts to the stock market. A war can crash the stock market. Especially this time, it's not just an ordinary war. If Russia is involved, this could lead to potentially catastrophic economic downfalls, considering that Russia is one of the leading exports of oil and natural gas. In the past years, oil prices were already rising, especially during the start of the pandemic. This, however, was expected and manageable. The oil demand dropped as more and more people stayed at home during lockdowns and many jobs turned to remote working arrangements set up. Many even believed that rising oil prices already reached their peak. But boy, how wrong we are. Oil prices increased more and more. In just a matter of days, it increased to over $100. Some might view rising oil prices as inconsequential, that it only affects that and nothing else. But here comes inflation. Rising oil prices mean a higher inflation rate. It has never been about oil and gas prices alone. But oil and gas prices increase, which also means that prices of goods will also increase. Let's take the supplies of apples as an example. For the apples to reach your local grocery stores, it is transported from the farms that might be located hundreds or thousands of miles away. Transportation is already costly as it is. But if the prices of oils and gas become expensive, this means that transportation of the apples becomes expensive as well. And to compensate for the rising cost, suppliers will then increase their prices, hence making apples more expensive in the market. The same logic applies to almost everything else we consume. Before this Ukraine-Russia crisis, the world already had a huge supply chain problem. Inflation was already high at 7.5%. If we add an oil crisis to that, imagine how it'll affect the prices of goods everywhere. It will be catastrophic. Inflation rates will soar higher and higher. When Russia began sending its troops near the borders of Ukraine in 2021, US officials warned that Putin might be preparing to launch a full-scale attack. Many people did not heed this warning, thinking that Russia might hold back because of possible repercussions from European countries and the international community as a whole. But lo and behold, look at what is happening. Russia is indeed launching attacks and trying to invade Ukraine. The question is, why is Russia attacking now? Why is it trying to invade Ukraine? Looking at history, the answer is glaring. Since Putin came into power in 1999, he was very vocal in his view that the collapse of the Soviet Union was the biggest geopolitical disaster of the 20th century. He expressed several times that he wants to restore and unite the former members of the USSR. These countries include Belarus, Ukraine, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and other Central Asian countries. Unfortunately for Putin, Russia failed to attract them since these countries want to establish a capitalistic economy and deal closer with Western countries. When capitalism did not work in Russia as it should be, of course the Baltic countries turned to the West. Some joined NATO and allied with other European countries. One country, however, remained close to Russia. Guess which country? Yep, Belarus. This might be because of the fact that Belarus shares a very similar culture to Russia. Russian is even one of its 2 official languages. Although it wanted to be independent and establish close relationship with Western countries, still, its history and relationship with Russia remain strong. Ukrainians, however, are different. They always wanted Ukraine to be a democratic and independent country. Unfortunately for them, Russia devised plans to intervene. It funded Viktor Fedorovich Yanukovych's presidential bid in the 2010 Ukraine election. With Russia's backing, Yanukovych became the fourth president of Ukraine. Hence, when Yanukovych was confronted with the decision to choose between Russia and other European countries whom to sign a deal with, it did not come as a shock that he chose Russia. Ukrainians were disappointed and went to the streets to protest. They were against Russia's intervention and control. Ever since then, hostility continued to grow between these two countries. Russia also started funding separatist groups in Donbas, which created political instability in Ukraine. It also annexed Crimea in 2014. Although most countries of the world still considered Crimea as part of Ukraine, it did not hinder Putin from invading the small peninsula and claiming it as one of Russia's federal subjects. And in the past few years, Russia had also been waiting to do the same with the rest of Ukraine. With its strong military powers, Ukraine is surely at a disadvantage. The spread of COVID-19 was also an advantage for Russia to develop stronger ties with some of its neighboring states. In Belarus, the pandemic triggered protests against the government's slow COVID-19 response. When it went out of control, guess what the Belarusian dictator did? Yup, it turned to Russia for help. Russian troops were deployed to Belarus to help, and they never left ever since. You might say, but what does it have to do with Ukraine? Well, the answer is location, location, location. Just look at the map and it will all make sense. Belarus is strategically located close to Kiev, Ukraine's capital city. This is where Russia can start its move toward Ukraine. The next question we should now ponder is, when will this war end? When will this crisis end? Russia expected a quick victory against Ukraine given its strong and large military capacity. It does not help as well that Ukraine does not have enough military resources and seems to instead expect NATO to help. How did the US respond? Well, President Biden made it clear that no American soldier will ever step foot on Ukrainian soil to fight. Ukraine is basically left on its own. If the war drags on, this will surely put Ukraine in a very difficult situation. The country is admittedly heavily reliant on Russian gas. And we all know that Russia is one of the largest oil producers in the world. Hence, if the war will not stop soon, then we should expect oil prices to keep rising. And we know that with high oil prices comes high inflation worldwide. Wars are unpredictable. Political uncertainty means more market volatility. The tendency is that in times of conflict and instability, investors will hold on to their cash, lowering the demand in the market. The effect? It will drag stock prices down. Hence, it is no wonder why the market has been down since the war started. If the oil prices continue to rise, then the overall market will now enter into a recession. This is when there will be a general decline in economic activity, which typically occurs when there is a widespread drop in spending. This will likely continue to happen and could even get worse unless the war ends soon. Now, you might wonder, what'll happen next? Is a higher inflation rate not the worst of the worst? The answer is that it is not. The worst case scenario is stagflation. Stagflation is recession and inflation combined. It is a situation where the inflation rate is high, but the economic growth rate is low. Prices will further rise because of the crisis, but the spending capacity of the market will spiral down. If this happens, the question we should be asking is, how low will the stock market crash? Thank you very much for watching. If you like what you've watched, stay tuned for more videos. Feel free to comment down below your requests and questions. We'll be happy to read them. Bye, financial buddies!